Welcome, Andy.
Hi, great to be here.
So, Andy and I have known each other for quite some time now, I think more than a year, right? Andy runs Practica, which is a platform for professional learning and coaching. And that's how we met because I've also done some coaching with Practica maybe 1 year ago or so, and it was a great experience. And we stayed connected through the refactoring community because I think we both work, let's say, in the space of making people grow professionally from different angles. I'm more of a writer, I write a newsletter, and he builds an actual product. So today's conversation is about one of the main devices through which growth is managed inside companies, I believe, which is career frameworks. And the perfect occasion for this came because Andy and the guys on his team did a very thorough job in identifying what makes for a great career framework. They created a template on their own. They're using it to help companies adopt or navigate this. So I wanted to have this conversation to get his own thoughts about this topic. So my first question would be just maybe just give us an overview of the kind of work that you have done on career frameworks. I know you have looked through many of them belonging to successful tech companies. You got insights and synthesized your own version of them.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for asking. I'm really excited about the topic of frameworks. It's such an important and complicated topic, and I'm just so glad there's a lot of discussion and interest in it right now. The idea of career frameworks and the thought to explore them deeply and build a product around career frameworks has always been something that's interested us at Practica. I can actually remember like our very first iterations and pitch decks and everything as we were ideating around Practica. We had this image of collage of all the example frameworks that companies have published, and they're all these super dense, complicated, wordy spreadsheets with just so many words and so much information. And it was one really powerful way to illustrate the challenge that's facing like modern tech workers today. You're expected to do all these different things and to be all these different things. And we could just see in the complexity of things and having felt ourselves being
Yeah.
in our careers, being compared up against these things, how difficult it is, how hard it is to navigate. So we've always had this idea around, can we do something better than this? Can we build something that gives the benefits of frameworks like this,
Yeah.
but doesn't have this challenge of this overly dense and complicated thing? So really since day one for us. And so our recent has been about first just understanding everything we can about what is being done. This is not a new thing. It's relatively new in the context of like tech in as the
Yeah.
whole. Like maybe companies have been doing this for about 10 years, but there's a lot of examples out there. So first understanding what everybody's been doing by really like analyzing all the examples we can find into all of their component parts.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, synthesizing all of this into what we sometimes call our template framework or
Yeah.
our industry standard framework or our canonical framework. So finding like what they all have in common. And then the challenge on top of that we explored and we're still exploring to this day is what can we build on top of that once we have that canonical framework or that standard framework? What kinds of user experiences and products can we build once we have that?
Yeah.
Because that dense spreadsheet like anxiety feeling that we feel looking at these like huge documents with paragraphs of text and words, we think one of the ways to address that
Yeah.
is with a product that can show me more my personalized view of this framework or what are my current strengths and weaknesses against this framework. And there's so much that a live product can do that a document can't do.
Yeah. And how hard it was? Were all such frameworks, especially from successful companies, all very diverse when it comes to skills levels? Or did you find that at least around some basic concepts, there was already some consensus?
Yeah, there's a clear answer to that we found in looking, which is that by and large there's consensus.
Okay, good
That's a
news.
theme. Yeah, that's a theme that we found like both in our detailed quantitative research, and I guess to give you an idea of what that looks like, we're reading like line by line of these frameworks and categorizing specific skills that we see like in a sentence, like collaborates well with others. There's so many specific skills that underlying that. So we're breaking down the text that we're seeing into these specific, more granular skills and seeing. So when we do that, we see lots of overlap. But then
Yeah.
also another component of our research was interviewing individuals that worked on these frameworks or that have seen a lot of these frameworks and experienced a lot of the pros of these and the cons of these. And when we ask leaders, people that have worked on these a lot, and ask them the question, are engineering frameworks more the same or more different across companies? Everybody says, oh, they're absolutely more the same. So people have different words for the different skills and ideas and themes and concepts, and company values are there. And there's all these ways in which company's uniqueness is expressed in
Yeah.
it. And I think that's really important. But when you look at the underlying skills and the underlying expectations, there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah, I think that's good news, of course, because the more
Yeah.
things are the same, the more it helps also mobility across different companies, roles, and aligning expectations about what is expected of your role, not just in your company, but in general in your career, in your space. But I also wonder, one of the recurring problems with any management device or management advice is that it changes a lot based on company size, scale, maturity. And so I wonder also based on I worked in a company that was in the transition of introducing a career framework, and it was like a mid-sized company, about 50 engineers or so. And I didn't leave the full transition because then I quit to run factoring full time. And one of the problems we ran into is that we didn't exactly know what was the right level of structure that we had to
Yeah.
introduce because of our size versus the size of maybe larger companies whose framework they right because they're more
Right.
famous. So have you found that how these frameworks change based on company sizes or stages?
Yeah, of course. What you're getting at there is like the one of the core ways that frameworks are different, which is like what is the level of detail or rigor in them.
Yeah,
And then in general, it stands to reason, and this is what we see, of course, when we look, that smaller teams go for less rigorous, less detailed frameworks,
yeah,
and larger teams spend a lot of time and energy enumerating every single way that a skill can be expressed, like finding example in the organization of that happening, annotating examples and expectations with company values and attributes and things. Like there's a huge range of complexity. And one of the things that really fell out of our conversations and research was that the success of a framework is not about how detailed and complex it is. It's more about how much does the level of detail match what's needed at a given time at a company. And in fact, a
yeah,
mismatch in level of detail can lead to bad results. So I always like throw out this way of thinking about a framework that is provocative in how low the detail is. There are some ways that you can express a career framework in a single sentence or in a single sentence for each level, like very simple ways to do it. And I came across a lot of them. One that I really like is the concept of scope of influence or scope of ownership. So a good way to express this would be engineer focuses on doing their own work really well. A senior software engineer focuses on helping their team as a whole do work
yeah,
really well, which might mean building abstractions for other people or mentoring other people or planning a project a few steps down the road so that other people can work on it.
yeah,
A staff software engineer is focused on the organization and building things that influence the entire organization. And you can go even further. A principal software engineer is developing things that push the industry forward in their
yeah,
area, or that not just their organization, but the entire company forward for
yeah,
a larger company. So you can have this like single sentence formulation, and even that is like highly useful, right? Because it
yeah.
gives an individual a way to think about, okay, if I want to become a senior software engineer, what
Yeah,
are
and
the kinds of things?
that is what you suggest to start with. Is there like a gradual journey from starting from zero to having maybe engineering principles, not even levels and something, and then they turn into more specific expectations about the various roles, but then it's just maybe one sentence, as you said, and then over time you grow this into more detailed skills and levels.
Of course, yeah. I can't advocate for one particular place to start, but the thing I'm really sure of is that the more that a framework can evolve, the better, and the more people are willing to believe in it and buy into it. I think that touches on one of the core ways that these can fail, which is that the individuals that are subject to the framework that are being asked to
Yeah,
use it and benchmark themselves against it don't really feel like they had a hand in generating it and they didn't really have a say in it.
yeah,
It's not very meaningful to them. And I think that explains why if you were to say, give you an example, let's say you have, okay, my engineering team is three of us. If we were to say, take Dropbox's or Facebook's engineering career framework and say, we're going to use this, it would feel terrible to the engineers on the team. They would go, well, a lot of this, like, is talking about things I can't even do because it requires having another engineering team to work with if
sure.
it's just us, right? And we value different things. I can't say that there's one time, like one time it's the right time or the right way to start for a company. But I like use this example of single sentences, right? To just remind you that you can start basically as early as you want.
Yeah.
And with that, I think you have to be willing to change it, because I think there's this kind of vicious cycle, which is companies feel some pressure to make these like detailed and rigorous
Yeah.
because those are the examples that they see. Generally, it's the bigger companies that are publishing and spouting, hey, look at us amazing thing. You come work here. We're so focused on growth. We give you all these pathways. This is how we think of it. Companies
Yeah.
really push their hard work in developing these detailed frameworks. And it makes you feel like, whoa, there's a lot of work to create one of these. And then you buy into that. And so you bring in like all of your staff engineers and your cross-functional leaders, and you have this huge project to create this framework, and you start to feel precious about it because now you've invested like a
Yeah.
series of 1 hour meetings over a month or 2 months to get consensus, and you've sent out versions and drafts and stuff. So you do all of this, and then you think, well, I can't change it. It's hard. We worked so hard to create this perfect product, and I now I
Yeah.
can't change it. But it needs to change because the needs of the company change, the size of the team changes. So that's like the most important thing, is that you can start at any time. There's no time that's like too early to define it at some level of detail, and that there should be a way to change it. And if you can do those two things, that's what's going to create the buy-in from your team, because they'll feel like it matters, like it matches their expectations. They have a hand in shaping it
Yeah.
too.
How do you change the framework? Is it that you attach some retrospectives and reflection to, for example, performance reviews or goal setting that is done maybe quarterly or twice a year or something like that? How do you see companies that are successful at keeping it relevant and used within the company?
That's a really great question. I wish I had better answers for you specifically about what I see that works. But
Yeah.
one thing that I can tell you is important is a clear process for contesting it in some way, or for giving feedback. No,
Mm.
contesting is a little bit combative, but giving feedback on the framework. So one
Yeah.
example of this that I've seen that I know would make me feel really good as an engineer that was working, my career was subject to this framework, is a sentence at the bottom like of every page of documents say. And we've built this into our product too, so I'll explain how that works in a second. A sentence at the bottom of every page that says, if you feel like you're doing work at this particular level, but you don't see it represented here in the framework, reach out to this Slack channel or this person. Just a
Yeah.
way for people to simply express, an invitation to express. So an open
Yeah.
door policy for feedback on the document, hand in hand with this, the thing I talked about before of it feeling like this big to do to generate, and you get people in the room and you come up with this thing that's really perfect and ideal, and it's this thing, it's balanced and it's so precise and good. Is people need to feel like it's like, we need to recognize that it's not perfect. It can't be perfect. Like this, the
Yeah.
profession is too complex. People are going to see things there that they disagree with, or not see something there that they think should be there. Is actually, I think, even more common. Hey,
Yeah.
I'm doing this and it's really important, but I don't see it. I don't see it here. I've been asked to do this, in fact, and it's important, but I don't
Yeah.
see it here. There needs to be a way to express it. And that's something that's so important, because if that's not there, then it's just really plainly clear to individuals that like this is not for them to be messing with, and that's not a good feeling. You engineers that I've worked with and that I know want to have control and autonomy over the priorities and the stuff.
But I can totally relate about this perfectionism tendency. I would say by engineers in general, but I think with career frameworks, there is also the tricky part that, in my experience, rolling it out is a tricky experience because it
Yeah,
affects people's work directly. So I think you wonder whether people would be pissed or would not be able to find themselves in the either in the current level, correct level, or with the current level of expectation with respect to what
yeah,
they do. So maybe that generates more pain from pushing something that we all know it's not perfect. We all know we have to iterate, but we also maybe expect people to have strong reactions to this.
yeah.
How do you fight this? Involve people in the process? How do you roll out a career framework?
Yeah, rolling out a career framework is one of the most popular questions that comes up when we do this. And I've had the chance, through the research that we did and the interviews that we did, we actually encountered a couple of companies that were right at the time where they were doing the rollout, creating the framework and rolling it
Yeah.
out. And when that happened, we said, let's help. Let's work with you on it. We hope to build a product around this someday. So this will be really valuable research for us to just be facilitating you and your other engineers and other engineering leadership that's working on this. So I had the chance to do that with a couple of companies, and that was so insightful. And the things that happened for rollout that went well and that didn't go well were really great. And I can share some with you. But it won't be any surprise to hear that engaging the team is like the answer, and doing so early and often is the answer. So that can be very difficult if your team is large. That's like maybe another reason
Mm.
to remind ourselves that you can start doing this with a small team, a very small team. You can start doing it with
Yeah.
nobody, actually. And if you do that, it's going to be much easier to involve individuals over time. So I can contrast two examples. I worked with one company that had an engineering team of maybe 150 that was rolling out their framework, and another company where the engineering team was 20 or 30, and they were rolling out the framework. So for that company that the engineering team was 100 or 150, I have to give them credit because they did a lot to involve the team. They had a
Mm.
long series of like open town hall meetings to discuss the framework. They sourced examples. This was something that I think was really unique, and they got a lot of participation, which to me tells me that it was successful. They came up with a undetailed view of the framework
Yeah.
first, without the details filled in, but just generally, almost like that single sentence version that I said at the beginning. This is generally what we're thinking for L2, and this is generally what we're thinking for L3, but a single sentence or two sentences. And then they said, this is not final, but we're just using this very rough framework. Submit your examples. Tell me what you're working on, like an open call, a Google form, I think literally for the team. Tell us what you're working on, and tell us if you think this is an example of level 3 work in this area. Submit your examples. And they got a ton, and then they went from this pile of raw stories from the team and used those to shape the
Yeah.
levels and define the boundaries between the levels.
Yeah.
And so that was a really cool example of like radically sourcing participation from the team, even if the team is large. And that is a lot of work, right? The downside of that is that that's a lot of work. So we see that having a large organization and trying to roll this out in a large
Yeah.
organization and do it in a way that feels good for everybody can be a lot of work. The smaller org was able to do this more quickly because every manager was participating in this. Oh, and some of the engineers,
Mm.
like it wasn't too big of a group. You could have a pretty good sample of the engineering team, both leadership and ICs, in a single call. And so they were able to say, okay, great, we're going to do this. Let's go talk to our teams about it. They didn't have to plan big company-wide events, town halls. They didn't have to use things like Google Forms and stuff to collect. It wasn't this big data collection effort and PR
Yeah.
campaign, right? But they still did a lot of those same things to
Yeah.
engage people in the building process. I think
Yeah.
that engagement in the process is really important. But getting specifically to the rollout, one thing that both of these organizations did to good effect was making it very clear that the framework, when it hits the public in any kind of form, not the public, but the public at the company, anybody can
Yeah.
see it, that it is still clearly in people call it a draft mode or a beta mode, or
Beta mode. Yeah.
being explicit that it's not going to affect your compensation. That was something that I saw a lot. Like for the first 6 months that this framework is, or for at least the first 6 months while this framework is live, we're not going to make any compensation affecting decisions based on it before we feel more confident that it matches where people feel that they are. That's a very concrete thing that I saw that helped a lot, because people are worried about how it's going to affect their career,
Sure.
their title, their compensation, and anything like that.
Yeah, and then especially if these same people then are involved in the process, there might be bias. So if you're not being clear in what will happen with the rollout, people will feel some restraint from contributing the ideas that are maybe too different from the status quo. And people don't know what will happen. But anyway, I think your story about the large company is great, because the more I see how companies are able to do big company-wide planning or activities, the more the processes all look like the same, whatever they're building, whether it is yearly planning or career frameworks or whatever. It's always a back and forth between top down direction and bottom up input. People are involved, so that maybe the leadership gives a first direction, and in this case it was maybe principles, core areas, and then challenges the teams and people at the lower level to come up with their own implementation or details of this. And this always worked, whatever you're working on. It's might be
Yeah.
career frameworks or no. Okay, that's the secret, but it seems simple, but it's in reality it's very hard.
Yeah, the collaboration between the top down and the bottom up, and finding the right balance of that. You're right, that's a theme across any organizational challenge that we might have. We see that in product building a lot too.
Yeah, and when it comes about differences between frameworks for larger frameworks and frameworks that you create a smaller version because you're a smaller company, do you find that the differences are mostly just quantitative? There are lower levels, but skills and what people need to do, it's pretty much the same, or there are also less skills maybe or different skills altogether that you need in a smaller startup, for example, than a big tech?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good question. So, yeah, of course, there is a difference in level of detail, but is there also a difference in what is valued on the framework? I think that's not like a specific question that I did quantitative research on or any kind of like objective research on, but I believe that the answer is yes. That's something that I think I can speak to simply from my experience of working in like large organizations and small organizations throughout my career. I think anyone who's done that will tell you like the skills you need are different in different sizes of organizations. But does that always get reflected in the framework? I think sometimes, like I was saying before, it doesn't because companies take a shortcut of let's just grab what this company's doing. I think that, and then there isn't a process in place for keeping up to date or giving feedback on it or giving input on it. I think that's why I say it's so important to remember that these things are need to be dynamic and that there needs to be a way to talk about them, discuss them, give feedback on them, change them so that we can honor the differences and in frameworks. We actually have this challenge in our company right now that somewhat stems from this because we were so focused on creating this standard framework or this canonical
Mm.
framework that's going to work, represents what's in common. And our product vision for it was that people would use it as a starting point, and then they would start to change it and mold it over time to what
Yeah.
is more important for their organization. And for our organization, we're unique. It was hard for us to get out of the mindset of building the standard framework and into the mindset of building the Practica framework, the one that
Yeah.
we care about. And to be honest, it's because we're so small, our Practica framework is still not perfect. There's a lot of blank squares on it, right? And areas where we're like, I don't know, like the skill is here, but it's not as important, or the way that cross-functional leadership looks in an organization like ours is just different than what it looks like in a
Yeah.
bigger organization. So our own Practica engineering framework, we are as an engineering team of 3, of course that's a small team to have such a detailed framework, and we struggle to keep it like fully up to date, and we're doing it on top of this product that we feel is really streamlined and great. That's to say that it shouldn't be under. I'm making it sound so easy. Oh, you just talk about it. You give feedback, you keep it up to date, you have a process for giving feedback. It's not that easy. The company has to buy into that and coalesce around that too. Even us, we work so hard to live and breathe this stuff. It's hard for us.
Yeah, I think this reassures many by thinking that even you, that are maybe one of the largest experts by now, struggle maybe internally sometimes to figure out what really matters or keep things up to date. So
Yeah.
it's definitely a common thing.
Yeah. One thing we would love to do with our product is right now we have this single template. And I think that in and of itself doesn't convey what I've been really talking about here, which is how important it is to have the template match your
Yeah,
needs at your stage. And so a logical step for us would be to say offer like multiple templates that can match your different needs in different stages, or find some way to vary what it is that we offer. And I think right now one of the things our product suffers from is that it is this single starting place.
yeah.
Does suffer from a little bit of that information overload. Wow, there's a lot here. Sense
Mm.
that we talked about, our users look at that and go, oh, this isn't perfect,
It's too
but
much.
how should I change it? Yeah, how should I change it? So
Yeah.
that's a real challenge from a product.
Yeah, that reminds me of, I remember starting using the first tools about engineering metrics and engineering analytics when this space was still very early. You were bombarded by all these metrics and charts and numbers, and people didn't even know what you had to do with this, how you attach this into processes. So I totally see how maybe a small company looks at a big, very structured and very insightful framework, but definitely maybe too big for them, and ask themselves, okay, but how can we use it? How can we tailor it to what we are, to just the subset that we need?
Yeah, it touches on interesting idea that I encountered in the research. Talking like this came up more in interviews with experts who have done this with a few different teams. A few people pointed to the value simply of spending the time doing it as a huge source of the value itself. And so one of our initial hopes was, okay, if we provide something that's really great, people will just take it and run with it and make it their own, and they'll believe it right away. But now
Yeah,
I'm wondering more, and we're as a company wondering more, is the process itself valuable? Is getting people spend those hours in the room discussing values and how to break them down into skills? Maybe that time is what's so important, right?
yeah.
Like I said,
Even
because
if
that's a
there
real
was no
problem.
output, even
Right,
without the
exactly.
output itself.
Yeah, sometimes people will say exactly like just like the framework is successful even if it starts a good conversation. It doesn't have to be like always used as the evaluation criteria or anything. Just starting the conversation. It reminds me of what people say about personality tests too, where it's like
Yeah.
you might not actually learn that much from the results, but it starts a good conversation either with yourself or with your team members or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, there are many instances of this. Just like we did the example, of organization-wide planning and activities. And there are many activities like that, that just spending the time to have the conversation is actually the most valuable thing as opposed to any artifact output that you produce. So maybe the lesson here is to keep having the conversations.
Yeah,
When we were talking about how you keep this updated, maybe it's, I wouldn't say it's the wrong question, it's the right question, but maybe the right answer is you just keep having the conversation, you keep the time,
yeah.
take the time to do this.
Yeah. Yeah, that really lines up with what I said about how important it is to just have some process in place for giving feedback, even if it is just a sentence at the bottom that says, "Hey, if you don't see what you're looking for here, like go to this Slack channel or send an email to this address." Like something, because that's what that is keeping the conversation ongoing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I read your article that you have published on Medium just yesterday about your some of your
Yeah.
learnings about these career frameworks. And one of the things that stuck with me is that it looks like leadership and collaboration skills absolutely dominate
Yeah.
the most
Yeah.
impactful and most relevant skills in frameworks. So
Yeah.
did you expect this? And what's your comment about this for, and maybe advice for engineers who instead focus a lot on growing technical skills, which seems easier to do with respect
Yeah.
to growing leadership and other skills?
Yeah, there's so much wrapped up in that. So did we expect it? I think I can't say that specifically it was a hypothesis we had in it and we confirmed it.
Yeah,
But I think it's one of those things where you look at it and you go, looking back over my experience and the kinds of things I've experienced in the conversations that we have as engineers, it's not like a surprising result. I think that's what I wrote in the
yeah,
post, which is that if you've spent time trying
yeah,
to move up in an engineering career, that just doing amazing technical work is rarely sufficient
yeah,
to get a promotion or to take a step. It can be, especially if you have really awesome manager, people around you that are going to sponsor you and amplify your work. But I think that's the first place that comes to mind where the you need to have communication and leadership skills, or you need to at least work on those for yourself to advance in your career, because you need to be able to talk about your own work and amplify it and talk about the impact that it has, explain your decision making process. So many things behind building software is not writing code, and building great software is not writing code. It's not, like I said, not surprising that we found that. And the nature of the research that we did, breaking down like skill, like kind of broader skill statements and expectation sentences into component skills, also makes sense that it would lead to this. There's so many sweeping statements that can be made about somebody, about leadership or about collaboration, or even something like giving feedback.
yeah,
It's not one, these things are not one skill, that these are the things that are really complicated, that have five component skills like active listening and clear communication and
yeah,
managing up and all of these, that like these components of all these things. It stands to reason that these collaborative and leadership sentences and values and the frameworks that we're looking at would expand into numerous sub skills when we look closely.
yeah. This reminds me of the fact that a few months back we ran a wide survey to the factory newsletters about many topics around engineering careers in general, I would
Yeah.
say. And one of the insights that came out of this is that most people agree with this actually, that the skills that are actually the most impactful to their careers are non-technical skills, are more like behavioral, leadership, management, communication skills. But then there isn't much consensus around what people should do to improve such skills. Okay. There is more, everybody knows that they can take a course on Udemy or whatever to learn more about React or whatever. But
Yeah.
then I feel it is still, and of course, you know this problem very well,
Yeah.
probably. It is still not much widespread notion that you should actively grow. You can actively grow professionally, intentionally on skills that are more behavioral. And there is coaching, of course, and there are other things. But it feels to me, maybe this is just my perspective, that in engineering, it is still not as highly regarded or widely spread as it should be, probably, given that we all agree that this is the most important stuff for
Yeah.
people to grow. So what's your take on this, that basically you work on this all day long?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really glad you asked it because it's I think this is a question that's maybe the most important of my career so far, the one I'm most interested in. First thing I'll offer is maybe an explanation of why it's like this. Like, why is there, I won't say taboo around leadership
Yeah,
skills, right? It's you offered one, which is it's technical skills are just like maybe just easier to learn. Like
yeah,
there's a course, you learn it. And especially once you programming languages or frameworks or monitoring systems, like learning another one is actually pretty easy. Sure, it's become a super expert in it will take some
it's
time, but it's
consequential.
easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very easy to learn a technical skill. The other reason that I see is that management is somewhat still a dirty word. We talk
Mm,
about going into the management track. It comes with this connotation of selling out a little bit, or oh, you're not
mm,
writing
mm,
code
mm.
anymore, like you're losing your coding skills. You're only managing now, so it still is like has a little bit of this idea, and that management track, as it's often called, is where these leadership skills are like really obviously celebrated,
Yeah,
right? I think anyone would say, oh, sure, to become a director of engineering, you definitely need leadership and organization skills, of course.
yeah,
What I think the missing piece is that people don't realize that the same leadership skills and communication skills are like equally essential on the other track, the senior IC
yeah,
track, being a senior engineer, a tech lead, or a staff engineer. It's somewhat of a misunderstanding or a myth that going down that track only requires technical skills, but that's not the case. That's, I think, the first problem is that we don't, as an
mm,
industry, yet understand how important the collaboration and leadership skills are when you aren't an organizational leader according to the HR team. When
yeah,
I like think about all the time and all the coaching that we've done and all of my own personal growth, like the skills required in these both management roles and director roles and C-suite roles are like similar to the skills that are required in senior
yeah,
engineer, tech lead.
yeah,
Yeah, there's some uniqueness in the two areas, but like it's more overlap than unique. So
yeah,
that's the first thing. When it comes to how to actually learn these, because you're right, it's not like I guess you can go to Udemy and find a course on management or find a course on leadership, find a course on feedback
mhm,
too. But what I find is lacking from those, and this gets to why we started Practica in the first place, is they're too like far removed from the reality. And the reality is that the technical challenges and the collaboration challenges and leadership challenges are highly intertwined, right? And we've all been in these meetings where it's, are we going to build X or Y? And what's the most important? Is it the timeline? Is it the experimental value? Is it the revenue generation?
yeah,
Understanding, like already I've gotten to a point where I'm like, it requires business understanding, listening skills, the ability to explain a technical like thing to an audience of people that wouldn't understand the technical specifics of it, and explain to them what they need to know. So quickly you can get to this challenge. Basically the moment that you're not just executing well-defined like tasks that someone has given to you, the moment that, and it's pretty quickly that you break out of that and you're asked to, okay, drive this project, you got to accomplish this goal. But the moment that you get there, it's not that like you have these leadership skills that just get added on. It's that the leadership skills are like deeply entangled with your technical challenges all of a
yeah,
sudden. And so I found as an engineer struggling to give feedback to a designer on why this thing that they gave me isn't feasible because of like this quirk in
yeah,
the library.
yeah,
Like I'm not going to go to a LinkedIn Learning like feedback course to do that. Like I don't
yeah,
believe that what I'm going to learn there. I know what I'm going to learn there, and it's going to say things like that I already know. Give direct feedback, make sure
yeah,
to pause and ask for a response, make sure to talk about things that objectively happened. Don't personalize it, right? They're going to give me these things like these
yeah,
very HR training kind of things. And I'm
yeah.
like,
It's very
that's good.
high level.
It's
Yeah,
good. I know it. I'm going to try to do that, right? But what I want is somebody to be like, hey, it's really hard to give designers feedback in this way, and this is what is
yeah,
nuanced about that. This is what I found that works. So that's what I think led us to explore one-on-one coaching as one of like our early offerings with Practicas, because we
yeah,
saw how complicated the challenges were with learning organizational skills and how you can't like disentangle them from technical challenges. Often they're so unique and so tangled. Now to get to your question about like how do you learn the skills, right? Because I think coaching is really good. Like obviously we do that and it is successful. I think that's a well-studied problem. The thing that I would like to see more of in the world and see more of it like in myself too. And I think Practica strives to create this behavior and push people in this direction is building intentionality around skill generation
Yeah.
and applying that same. We have intentionality when it comes to I need to learn React. It's easy to be intentional about that because it's such a concrete thing. But applying that same intentionality to I need to develop my feedback giving skills or my delegation. Let's use a different example. Delegation is a
Yeah.
great example. I need to learn how to delegate. Now, sure, yeah, go watch that, read that article, or watch that talk or whatever about it. It's going to help you. But the most important thing is that you know that delegation is a skill, that you've
Yeah.
identified it as one that you're going to need to do
Yeah.
to get better because maybe you're doing too many things on your own and you need to free up time for more deep work or more strategic work or something. You've recognized it, named it to yourself, and that you are thinking about it while you are going about your day, right? And this is one of the
Yeah.
things that a coach can really do is they can say, hey, you need to delegate this task to this person, and I'm going to be here in 2 weeks asking you if you did it and asking you how it went, that accountability. So that is something that forces you to think about it in your day to day. And so the thing that I think is so important and the thing that we're trying to work on with Practica right now is can we create a behavior where we're being intentional about our skill growth and thinking about those skills every day and being thoughtful. Okay, I'm going to try to delegate right now. I'm going to do it and I'm going to see how it goes. And then I'm going to think about it afterwards and do it better next time. So the
Yeah.
same intentionality that we can apply towards learning a technical thing, the question is, can we apply that to like any of these
Yeah.
mushier, more collaborative organizational leadership communication, these skills that are so big and important?
Yeah, you gave a great answer, and I think you packed so much stuff in the answer. I will try to highlight a few things that I really liked. And one is that you said this at the beginning, that we have this intuition. I mean, that since we have separate career tracks, for example, for managers and ICs, it should be intuitive that the more you progress on this track, the more you diverge and do different things, while it's not actually the case. I mean, there is always a big overlap. Even if you grow on the ladder, there are a lot of things that you still do in both cases. And that is counterintuitive, but and should be addressed accordingly when it comes to skills that you need. So not only, I mean, there is I would say a taboo, a stigma around the fact that behavioral, like management, leadership skills are not something that you might be intentional about growing in general, even if you are a manager probably, but
Yeah.
especially if you are an IC, this is like total taboo. You should probably just flex your muscles when it comes to
Right.
tech jobs, etc. So that's a really great point. A reality check to people who want to grow an IC career is that you will probably have a big overlap of what is needed from to have high impact and have a successful career uh, with another managerial career.
Yeah.
And another thing that you mentioned is that there are, of course, courses of you on Udemy and similar platforms about management, communication, leadership skills, but they're detached from reality because they do not, these situations and these skills are not applied like in a vacuum, but
Right.
they largely depend on the context. That is, if you're an engineer, it's the technical context. If you're working in other space, maybe it's another context,
Yeah.
but they do not work like in isolation. Yeah, you can learn a formula, a framework that kind of works, but then you have to make it grounded into your reality. And so my question would be, is that mostly why such courses, such approach that is like one size fits all doesn't work as opposed to one-on-one coaching, for example? Or is it also that maybe these courses are outdated? And can we do
Mhm.
better, do you think, to make, for example, to create some good education that is not just one-on-one for this kind of skill? Or do you think
Yeah.
that it's the best way will always be
Yeah.
one-on-one coaching because of the nature of this?
That's a really difficult question and another really important one.
We are
I think
diverging a
that,
little bit from career
yeah,
frameworks, but I think we
that's
are
okay.
always staying in
That's
this space.
okay. Yeah, we were talking about the tracks, right, of like
Yeah,
senior IC versus manager, and
true.
that's like such an
Right.
important like that core like thing is one of the reasons why companies often develop these frameworks too, because the common question
Yeah.
is, hey, is becoming a manager the only way to progress here? And then they go, oh no, look, you could be a tech lead. And doing it, I wrote this in the article, but like building a framework in response to a question like that means that you probably waited like too long to
It's too
start
late. Yeah.
to start. Yeah, you'll probably be able to recover, but it's gonna be more painful at that point. So I do think that one-on-one is possibly the easiest way to
Yeah,
to develop these skills. And the reason why I say that is because the skills are so like complicated and intertwined and specific to a technical area. Finding somebody who's been through that before and learning directly from them is like the easiest way to do it. And that's one reason why Practica launched coaching as our first offering is okay, we want to help people learn in their careers. What's the way we can do this? Okay, let's help them. And in the very beginning, it was me and my co-founder. We were the two coaches, and then we expanded the community to more when we saw that it worked well. I do think we can do better, and I think one of the problems with one-on-one is that it's expensive. Like plain and
yeah,
simple, you have to the time of another person is quite expensive, right? You would have to hire a person sometimes to get help, right, or to get expertise. That's the challenge that we're working with right now. Also, the complexity of finding the right person is a hard problem too. So the
yeah,
challenge is, can we get some of that magic for lower cost and at a greater scale and deliver it to everybody, or find a way for everybody to access this kind of personalized knowledge? And that is
yeah,
like a truly difficult problem. That is one that I'm like overwhelmingly privileged to be able to work on in my day-to-day work. Some of the ideas that we have that are exciting to us in that direction are harnessing the like power of the content that's out there. Luca, you're an example of this right now. You are writing about exactly this thorny intersection that I'm talking about right now.
yeah,
When I read your newsletters, this is what your work, these are where the challenges are, and this is what you're talking about. And so finding a way to surface the right content at the right times to somebody with the right queries is a really tremendously difficult problem. If you were to search, how do I give feedback to a designer? It would be like a lot of wading through various like vendor articles and like
yeah,
SEO squatting pages and stuff like that. It's really hard to find this like nugget of gold. Even if you found like the perfect talk, there's like a nugget in there that's, or the perfect blog post, there's a nugget in there that's really valuable to you, but it's still maybe hard to find. So there's
yes, it
this
is.
question of surfacing and curating and finding. And for that, like we look at the recent like leaps forward in AI that is now available to us, and that's something that's really exciting to us as a team. Can we leverage the latest generation of AI to like help with this personalization and curation and finding
Yeah,
the problem? The other piece of it that you got from a coach, I've mentioned this a couple of times, is the accountability. That's a little easier
yeah,
to imagine replicating in like a scalable way because we see examples of it. Like we talk a lot on our team about Duolingo, the language learning app, that it to me is like the
yeah,
canonical example of a company that's
yes,
mastered accountability, and to the point where it's like they're really like loud about it. You got your streaks, your streak freezes, like your bonuses, your packages. So much gamification is in there, and so much, and people care. So I don't know if you know anyone who's like intimately passionate about their streak. Like they like
yes,
their Duolingo streak is a part of their identity. Like they've managed to do this thing. We've managed to achieve it at Practica with a one-on-one coach, but doing that with something that feels like an algorithmic like coach.
yeah,
That's an aspirational goal, but even just a reminder to do a thing on Friday. Like one of the things we're experimenting with right now is what if we remind people to be intentional about the skills that they want to generate by getting in touch with them on Monday and saying, hey, set your intention this week, picking a skill that you're going to work on this week. So even something at that level can help to create that accountability. Those are the two things. Can we, the answers are out there. It's easy to get them if you find a person that can give you them, but it's hard to
yes.
surface them at the right time when you need them. And then the accountability piece is the other thing you get one-on-one. That is like the question: can we deliver that, or can we offer that, and can that be something? Can we build that habit in people?
That's a great answer, and I have so many. I would have so many follow-ups on accountability and this topic, but I want to stop a little bit to ask if there are questions from people out there, Edmond, Bernard, or otherwise. Of course, I have more questions for Andy because and your answers make me think on of other questions constantly. So you let me know, guys, either in the chat or you can unmute yourself to ask questions. Otherwise, I can go on like forever. Doesn't seem to be questions. So Andy, while when you one thing I wanted to say is that in a way the question that I asked is also a selfish question, right? Because as you said, I mean, I create content that basically is for everybody, right? It's not personalized. So I sometimes wonder where how useful this is, how much people can take from this as opposed to conversations one on one. And I think there are two angles that you explained very well. One is that doing one-on-one conversations, of course, allows you to bring in more context and get
Mhm.
personalized answers. But I think the accountability bit is very important for people who have, maybe they even know that they should focus intentionally on something, but they don't have the energy to do this on by themselves. Part of the value that an individual, a coach brings, is that it brings part of the energy that is required to make this happen. It's like when you join a workshop or you join something live. Maybe sometimes the same content could be found in a book or something,
Mhm.
but it would be totally on you. It would be
Yeah.
you to go through that, try to find how to apply it in your job, while having another person makes it happen.
Yeah.
Of course, you can simulate that. Duolingo
Yeah.
is a great example of that. But you have to be really a master of
Yeah.
gamification and the type of dynamics. And it's
Yeah.
just easier, as you said. You make it through a person, and it scales worse. Of course, it's more expensive, but it
Yeah.
has a real value that not everybody understand, I feel.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that makes me think about that we've learned this in doing the one-on-one matching actually is what is important to narrow down because the one-on-one is not guaranteed to work. There has to be an overlap in
Yeah.
their interest and their expertise and what they want to learn. We worked hard to classify like how to increase the likelihood of that overlap. And one of the things sort of we have three dimensions that we look at that overlap. The first one is like where in your career, like how long into your career are you? What level are you? And what this is maybe the most obvious. Are you a senior engineer trying to become
Yeah.
a tech lead? That's the first match up on that. And the second is company size and stage, which is incredibly important. So if you are interested, and we got this with Edmund right now, they're asking, do you have anything that's relevant for an earlier stage company? That's so important because like a career framework from Google won't work for an early stage company. And similarly, advice from somebody who's only ever worked at Microsoft will not help somebody who's in a seed stage company. And then the third we look at as a catch-all for like tech stack specifics or product area specifics, or is it B2B or B2C, anything else about the role, right? But those first two of like where in your career and where is your company, maybe that's a way to personalize more than just here's an article, find the thing that's like relevant for you. Maybe I can imagine at the top of an article something like click here to jump right to the section that's relevant for early stage companies. Maybe
Yeah.
that way of breaking it down. There's these really key ways of breaking it down in career stage for yourself and company stage for the employer, like where these problems are relevant, are really useful to break that down.
Yeah. No, totally. And I also see Arthur's question about
Yeah.
imposter syndrome. And I wanted to say something, then Andy, you tell me if I'm on the right track on this. I think that, especially relating this question to the career frameworks discussion, is that I personally struggled with imposter syndrome a lot during my career because I've been very young CTO, and of course I didn't feel like I knew what I was doing.
Yeah.
But I think a big part of that, even in later stages of my career, was not just because when I thought that I should have been more expert in something or more capable, but even I think much of it was when I didn't know what was expected of me in terms
Right.
of skills. The syndrome is not just when you feel you're behind, but even when you're not sure what you should be capable of. So in that case, I think frameworks work magic because even if you figure out that you're not where you would like to be, that's something. That's a known unknown. That's something that you can work on as opposed
Mhm.
to be left wondering. I don't know what's your take on this. What's your experience?
I really like that way of thinking of it. That imposter syndrome isn't just knowing that you don't belong. It's like the wondering of,
It's
hey,
the
am I
wondering.
right? Yeah, totally. All I really have to add is simply that I also like feel like imposter syndrome is something I've struggled with throughout my career. It's like different in different stages, but it's been present like since day zero, honestly. Like in every internship I've had and for every job I've ever had, it's been present. It just changes. And if it's something that helps me to deal with it, to speak to Arthur's question, this is like possibly not the most helpful, but just being intentional about it. Like I said before about skill building, I think so. Imposter syndrome actually is a skill in the Practica curriculum, right? And people can label imposter syndrome in their coaching sessions or in their challenges. So just like I said, being intentional about it, knowing that it's a thing that you can have is like the first step, but also the most important step to dealing with it. It's not like something you can expect to vanish from your mind and from your feelings, but it's something you have to learn to identify and change your relationship to. So that's like my own journey on it and what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, that's still definitely something that feel basically every day. I think also the weirder is that your career choice, whether you're a founder or a creator
Yeah.
or a writer like me, the
Yeah.
most likely is that
Yeah.
you feel like, what am I even doing? But I think definitely when you have even, let's say, a regular work as either an engineer or a manager. In the past, I felt that my relationship with my manager would really make a difference with that. Receiving
Yeah.
good feedback, receiving good expectations played a crucial role in making me feel whether I was on the right track or not. And in some cases, there are, of course, better and worse managers. But
Of course.
if you feel that, I feel there is no such thing as too much feedback that you can receive.
You're right.
So if you feel like you are unsure about what you should do, because if you whether you belong or not, because you are not receiving enough feedback, you should ask that plain and
Yeah.
simple directly. Because maybe there are also managers that think that people maybe do not react that well to too much feedback. So it's also up to you to set up a
Yeah.
relationship that is transparent and where the both of
Yeah.
you give
Absolutely.
most amount of feedback.
In the early days of Practica coaching, when I was coaching a lot of engineers, I would give this advice to a lot of people, which is, it sounds so simple, but had asked the question, like, have you asked your manager how you're doing? And people would say no. And I would say, that's something you can do. It's an uncomfortable question to ask. You might not want to know the answer, but trust me, if you know the answer, you're going to feel better regardless of what the answer is. Yeah, asking is so important.
Yeah.
Arthur, I'm not sure where you are in your career, if that's something that you can do, something that you can do right now or feel comfortable doing right now. But I really like that thread to pull. Can I just learn more? Can I get more information? Get more?
Yeah.
It's uncomfortable to seek it out because, like, I've been there already feeling like I'm not doing a good job, and I don't want to ask. But I think asking is so important, and it's gonna be hard to advance in your career if you're not unwilling to ask.
Yeah, totally. Probably if I had to isolate one piece of feedback, one piece of advice, I would
Mhm.
say probably that part about feedback is the most important one.
Yeah.
So I think we are out of time. So I want to wrap this up, mindful of everybody's time here. I want to thank Andy so much for being here. We had such a wonderful conversation, not only about career frameworks, but also philosophically about how to grow personally and professionally. It was a great chat, Andy.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun. If you ever want to, I know you've written a lot about imposter syndrome and all these career advancement things we've talked about. So would always love to come back for another conversation like this. I love to talk
Thank
about
you.
that.
Thank you. It means a lot. And this is recorded, so we will share this in the community in full and also small bits for those guys who do not have much time to see the whole recording. And so stay tuned in the community and the various channels. So you will hear from us, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.